All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the May Water Conditions Monitoring Committee. My name is Emily Adrid with the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Today we have presentations from the Colorado Climate Center, NRCS, and then we have an additional presentation today from the Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control, which they will be giving us um, some more information on wildfire conditions and outlooks. We have a pretty full agenda today. So I think we can get started with Allie from Colorado Climate Center.
Thanks, Emily. I'm going to share my screen here. All right, hopefully you can see this okay. Um, yeah, so I'll just jump right in. Here's our update so far for what we've been seeing in April and May so far. I feel like this is one of the more optimistic presentations that I've given in the last 6 months, so that's great. All right, so first let's just recap what we've been seeing for the water year so far. So jumping right in, so this is I if I believe Russ has given a presentation for WCMC sometime in the last few months, but this is his graphic that he's produced. So this is just kind of a summary graphic of what we've been seeing for the 2026 water year so far. On the top, we have information about temperatures and then information about precipitation on the bottom. Essentially, what this graph on the very top is showing is departure from normal temperature. So anywhere that you see red is above normal temperatures, blue is below normal temperatures, and then on this graphic here at the bottom, that is departure from normal precipitation. So I think this one is particularly informative to just kind of show how our precipitation deficits have kind of been stacking up over the last several months. You can see those bars kind of get more and more extreme with time. And then, you can break down the individual water years here. It's obviously been pretty dry over the last 6 months and also very, very warm. And we'll kind of break that down more here. So taking a look at our average temperature rank mapping, this is from October through April. So continuing to be the record warm uh, October through April on record. Pretty much if you break down any period in the last 6 months, you'll see that it was the warmest on record. We are starting to see at least some little pockets here of locations that did not see their record warmest October through April, but still statewide, it's been very, very warm. And of course, that's primarily driven by we had a record warm December, record warm February, March, and then, April continued our trend of being well above average. And then looking at precipitation, this is the same thing. So comparing October through April to previous October through Aprils. So anywhere that you see in brown on here are locations that have notched some of their driest October through April periods on record. Those darkest brown colors are locations that have seen their record driest October through April. So portions of southern Colorado as well as northeastern Colorado have seen very, very dry conditions. And then, lots of other locations have seen a top 10 dry for 7 months to the water year. And, again, breaking it down month by month, you can see that it's been consistently dry. Perhaps not, the highest rankings here, but with time, again, those precipitation deficits have really stacked up. And this is just showing where we're at in terms of percent of average precipitation for the water year so far, so October through end of April again. Once again, anywhere that you're seeing in brown are locations that are running behind on precipitation. Those darkest brown colors are places that have seen less than 50% of their usual precipitation, which again is quite a significant deficit. Notably still here in southeastern Colorado. Still seeing some kind of near normal precipitation values here. Once again, that's driven by those big October rains that we got at the start of the water year. If you take those out, they're pretty much sitting in the same place as the rest of the state is right now. And here are our quadrant charts. So once again, on the x-axis here, we have accumulated precipitation for the water year so far, and then average temperature for the water year so far. So once again, looking at October through April period, here is 2026 starred up here on the upper left. So very firmly in this warm, dry category. As you can see, our water year so far has completely blown out any other previous water first 7 months of the water year on record by several degrees warmer. And then, also sitting at fairly dry. There's only been kind of a handful of other water years that have been drier than this one at this point in the water year. So, very firmly warm and dry, which again, I'm sure is not super surprising to anyone. Okay, so moving forward to focus more on April and what we've been seeing in May so far. Nice photo from Cameron Pass this morning of some snow from the precipitation that we got yesterday. So here's taking a closer look at April. This is our April temperature ranking compared to past Aprils. Statewide, it was the 13th warmest April on record. So not nearly as hot as March, but still well above normal in terms of temperatures. Darkest colors there are locations that saw at least their top 10 warmest April on record. So particularly this heat was concentrated across the eastern plains of Colorado. And I think that these maps here are just pretty interesting to compare March versus April and just kind of speaks to the just how extreme March was. So on the left here, this is the March departure from normal temperature. If you look back in time, we were almost 10 degrees above the 30-year March average. And in April, still sitting above average, about 2.3 degrees above average, still notching the 13th warmest on record. But obviously, you can see the difference between these two maps. And if the March weather were to have occurred in April, it would have actually been warmer than this past April was. So our statewide average temperature in March was 46.8 degrees. In April, it was 45.9. So, again, just really speaks to just how unprecedented and extreme March was, even though April was still quite warm as well. And so moving ahead to precipitation, April's precipitation ranked as the 36th driest on record statewide, though we did see a pretty significant east-west divide here. So on the west slope, we saw some locations that actually ranked as one of their wetter Aprils on record, whereas across eastern Colorado, many locations saw their top 10 or top 20 driest April on record. So pretty big difference depending on which side of the divide you're on there. And this is just showing how that April precipitation differed from what we would normally expect in April. So once again, you see these blue colors on the west slope. Those are areas that saw a wetter than normal April. So much of the west slope saw some beneficial precipitation during that month, but across the eastern plains, it was very, very dry. Lots of places seeing less than 50%, less than 30% of their average precipitation for April. And I'll talk more about this in a few slides, but this really contributed significantly to deteriorating drought conditions in that area. And then moving forward to May, this is what we've been seeing for temperatures so far. This might come as a bit of a surprise. It did to me. Even though we had, a late season snowstorm a couple weeks ago, still sitting at a few degrees above average across most of the state. These red and orange colors are 2 to 3 to 4 degrees above average in terms of temperatures. This is through May 18th, which would be yesterday. So yeah, still sitting at above average across a large portion of the state, even though we had kind of that recent cold snap in a couple weeks ago. And then we're moving ahead to precipitation. So this is just precipitation over the last 7 days. I kind of wanted to highlight the recent precipitation that we've been seeing over the past, 48 hours or so. So really beneficial numbers across kind of north central Colorado, Larimer County, parts of Weld County, Boulder County, heading towards Denver as well. Well over an inch of rainfall or liquid precipitation. I guess there was snow in the mountains. So definitely some beneficial moisture numbers there. But of course, as you head further south, most of southern Colorado kind of missed out on this storm. But for the northern part of the state, definitely some beneficial moisture there over the last 7 days. And then moving forward, this is our May precipitation since the first of the month. So first of the month through the 18th as of this morning or yesterday morning rather. So this doesn't fully capture all of the precipitation that we received yesterday. But just kind of to note that even though, southeastern Colorado missed out on some of this recent storm, they have seen at least some precipitation in the month of May so far. Kind of the loser this month so far has been southwestern Colorado. You can see kind of little to no precipitation in the Four Corners region there. But it does look like there might be some precipitation on the way there at the end of the month, which I'll get into a bit later. And this is just showing how our May precipitation so far has differed from what we would normally expect at this point of May. So as you might expect, kind of north central Colorado running above average for May, which is fantastic news, as well as parts of the northeast corner of the state as well. But again, in Southwest Colorado, definitely running behind average for May so far. But again, remember they did see above average precipitation in April, so we've kind of seen, a little bit of a flip maybe. But as I'll get into more later, again, our deficits are still significant, and we're still seeing widespread drought throughout the state, despite these recent benefits over the last month or two. Um, just want to note, May is a big portion of northeastern Colorado's wettest month of the year. Anywhere that you see in this kind of dark foresty green color are locations where May is the wettest month of the year. A big portion of our precipitation in northeastern Colorado, as well as the Eastern Plains as a whole, falls during the month of May. So seeing above average precipitation at this time of year is a particularly positive sign, I would say. So definitely reaping the benefits up here in northern Colorado. Okay. Yeah, so now just getting into kind of a couple big weather stories from the last couple of months. So first talking about the Eastern Plains flash drought situation. This is showing the change in the U.S. drought monitor from mid-March to the end of April. So during the month of April, Eastern Colorado saw major deficits in precipitation, as I kind of showed in a few of the maps a few slides back. So, major moisture deficits there, and that's really caused the drought situation to go from almost nothing in some locations. Parts of southeastern Colorado were pretty much drought-free, back in mid-March, but, we had those record-setting temperatures at the end of March, coupled with a very dry April, and that kind of prompted this flash drought situation where some locations that were drought free suddenly were in extreme drought status in just, a less than 2 month period. So definitely have seen, drought worsen across the state over that period, but particularly in the southeastern corner of the state, definitely saw those drought conditions get much worse over the month of April. And then also in April, we had a pretty significant hard freeze. One of the locations that were most affected by this was the Western Slope. This is a photo here from the Colorado Sun of some frozen water on the Palisade peach crops. So, that definitely impacted some of the fruit trees in that area. I think they're still doing some accounting on just how significant that freeze was, but definitely seeing some damage to the fruit trees there due to those cold temperatures that we saw in mid-April. And then, of course, we had our kind of front range May snowstorm. This map here is showing CoCoRaHS precipitation, snowfall totals from May 4th through 6th. The big winners here were around the Estes Park area, where some locations recorded over 2 feet of snow. But of course, if you live in this area, you saw that snow melted quite quickly after it fell. It is May, so we have our high sun angle and warm temperatures that doesn't allow that snow to stick around very long, but nonetheless, certainly a welcome sight. Okay, moving ahead to dive into drought a little bit more closely. So here's the US Drought Monitor from this past Thursday. Data valid through last Tuesday, so about a week old at this point. Just kind of showing the US as a whole to note that, Colorado is kind of one of the epicenters of drought in the western US right now, but parts of the southeast are also experiencing a pretty significant drought at this time as well. So this is just showing a 4-week change map from the latest drought monitor compared to mid-April. So we haven't been seeing much in the way of improvements in drought over the last 6 months in Colorado. So you do see some greens on here suggesting that we have seen some improvements over the last couple of weeks. This, I believe, is primarily driven from that early May snowstorm that we saw. But again, still some worsening conditions in other parts of the state. And of course, if you go back from, back further in time, so this is mid-March compared to May 12th, the latest drought monitor. It says 4-week change, should be 8-week change there. Um, Seeing more of those yellow colors there. So net over the last 8 weeks have still seen worsening drought conditions, even though we've seen a couple short-term improvements in some locations. And that's true for broader parts of the West as well. So zooming into Colorado on our most recent drought monitor. So still just want to note that almost all of the state is still experiencing drought conditions at this time, including our most severe category of drought, exceptional drought in northwestern Colorado, as well as parts of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. And then, widespread severe to extreme drought in other parts of the state as well. About 47% of the state is currently sitting in that D3 category or worse. And this is just showing the change in our drought status since the beginning of the water year. So here's September 30th on the left. It might be hard to remember that almost all of eastern Colorado was drought-free at the start of the water year. Obviously, that situation has changed drastically. Anywhere that you see in those yellow and brown colors are locations that have seen deteriorating drought conditions over that time. Almost all of eastern Colorado and Colorado as a whole, of course, is currently in drought. So that's kind of been the story of the water year so far. And just digging into a few drought metrics here. So these two maps are showing soil moisture. On the left, we have our 10 centimeter soil moisture values. And then on the right, we have the 1 meter soil moisture values. So we did see a little bit of a boost in these 10 centimeter soil moisture values from that May snowfall that we saw. So that was a positive sign. This graphic here is from May 15th, so it's not reflecting that recent rainfall we saw. Should see some benefits in the next iteration of this graphic once that more recent precipitation is looped in. But still kind of want to note that even despite that recent precipitation, our deeper soils are still definitely showing low soil moisture percentiles. Anywhere in these kind of orangey red colors are places that are still running well below normal on their soil moisture. And this is just showing 7-day changes in those soil moisture values. So this kind of cuts out that snowstorm. So in the shallow soils, even though we had that precipitation, definitely still seeing drying out after that snowfall kind of melted and seeped into the ground. But in the deeper soils, we do see that that moisture did permeate and has at least like kept us near steady values across the eastern part of the state in the deeper soils. So still definitely saw some benefits there from the recent moisture. And I think what's also interesting to look at here is the evaporative demand drought index. So this is just showing basically it's a metric for how thirsty our soils are. So over the last several months, all of our graphics have kind of looked like this, almost exclusively this dark maroon color representing the most extreme category of evaporative demand. But over the last month or so, we've definitely seen those conditions kind of relax over the last month as we've seen a bit cooler temperatures, some beneficial precipitation. So that is a positive sign towards at least, our drought conditions not being quite as intensified by evaporative demand, at least as we've seen over the last 6 months. Okay, so moving ahead to future um, outlook here. So just taking a look at the next 7 days, this is the NOAA precipitation forecast. So starting with today and then moving forward over the next 7 days in these panels below. And then this graphic here on the upper right just shows how the forecasted precipitation is expected to deviate from what we would normally expect over the next 7 days. So these blue colors here are definitely a positive sign, expecting above average precipitation over the next 7 days across portions of eastern Colorado. Definitely a positive sign there. Expecting that moisture kind of over the next several days before we start to dry out heading into the weekend and early next week. But the west slope does stay mostly dry over this period, I will note. And this is just taking a look at temperatures over the next several days. So we have Grand Junction on the top and then Denver on the bottom. These time series go out to the beginning of June, June 3rd, all the way out there on the right. The recent weather we've been having has been welcome, definitely cooler than normal. But we are expecting to see sort of a steady incline as we round out the end of May and head into June. And I should back up and say that I've shown these before, but these are ensemble temperature outlooks. So it's basically one model that we kind of tweak in 50 different directions ever so slightly to kind of get a range of solutions of what we might expect. So once again, definitely seeing that steady incline over the next several days. And then as we head into June, a slow warm up. And then in terms of precipitation over this period, so on the top here, I'm showing Durango and then Denver here on the bottom. Again, West Slope is expected to stay mostly dry over the next 7 days or so, but we do see kind of this unsettled weather start to develop as we head into the end of May and in early June. So this is showing accumulated precipitation on the y-axis here. So definitely seeing some precipitation chances being hinted at, and in many of our models or ensemble members here. So that's a positive sign. In Denver, we are seeing some precipitation chances still over the next several days before we start to dry out. And then increased precipitation chances again as we finish out May and head into June. And I just wanted to show this graphic here, which is again showing that ensemble model forecast. So basically taking one model and tweaking it a bunch of different directions and seeing how many of them are showing above average precipitation on the right here versus below normal precipitation on the left. So you can see that most of the models, especially for central Colorado and eastern Colorado, showing above average moisture expected. This is going through the beginning of June, June 3rd here. So definitely a positive sign there. Perhaps in the West Slope, parts of those areas may be favoring more towards below normal precipitation over this period. But we'll take our water where we can get it. And this is just looking at the NOAA Climate Prediction Center outlooks for the next 8 to 14 days. As you might expect, we're sitting in this favored area for above normal precipitation in the next 8 to 14 days. So this takes us from mid-May or end of May to June 1st. And at the same time, also expecting to see above average temperatures over this same period as well. So yeah, kind of the further north you go, increased likelihood for above normal temperatures, but all of the state is kind of favored for sitting at above normal temperatures over this period. And kind of the reverse is true for precipitation. Southwestern Colorado favored the most to see above average moisture over this period. And this is the 3 to 4 week temperature outlook and precipitation outlook. So this takes us from May 30th to mid-June. Similar story here, above normal temperatures favored over this period, and also above normal precipitation favored over this period. So certainly welcome. We've been sitting in this brown category for below normal precipitation throughout much of winter. So definitely will welcome this. I did not show the seasonal outlooks here from NOAA because they're already about a month old. The new ones, I believe, are coming out tomorrow. So definitely check out the NOAA Climate Prediction Center outlook for those. But yeah, I did not include them here because they're a bit dated at this point. But moving ahead to El Nino, and so I'm sure a lot of you have heard in the news about the potential for super El Nino. So this graphic here on the right is showing collections of 3 month periods. So starting with April, May, June, July, August, moving forward with time all the way out to December, January, of February of next year. Oops. So basically what these bars are showing are these red bars are showing the percent chance of seeing El Nino conditions over this period, these collective 3 month periods. So as you go forward in time, El Nino is kind of all but certain to develop at this point. About an 82% chance that it will develop sometime in May through July. What these different color reds are signifying on these bars are the percent odds of different strengths of El Nino. So the lightest color would signify a weak El Nino. Of course, as we transition into that weaker El Nino conditions are kind of favored. But as we head into the fall and winter, it does look like we have a decent chance of seeing a strong El Nino event, sitting at about 30% odds or so of that as we head into this October, November, December, January period. And on the next slide, I'll kind of speak to what that means for Colorado. But at the same time, as we're seeing this El Nino watch, these El Nino conditions expected to develop, we're also seeing a lot of our climate models point towards an active monsoon season potentially developing as we head into the summer. And if you're familiar with Colorado at all, an active monsoon season often brings us beneficial moisture to the state. The further south you go, greater odds for that. So we have kind of these two factors at play, both El Nino and then the development and onset of the southwestern or North American monsoon. So in Colorado, when we see El Nino conditions present, that typically tends to correlate with wetter than normal conditions in the state. And then at the same time, if we have this active monsoon season, that also tends to bring us wetter than usual weather. So, kind of key message here being that our precipitation deficits in the state are still very extreme and major. But this is probably the best news that we've had over the last 6 months in terms of seeing large scale favorability for moisture in Colorado. So again, our relationship between El Nino and precipitation is not perfect here. This graphic kind of speaks to that here, where we're sort of in this middle zone between drier conditions to our east and wetter conditions to the south. Oops. But definitely if we're comparing El Nino versus La Nina, which is what we had over the winter, El Nino is certainly preferred for getting wetter than usual conditions for Colorado. And of course, our low snowmelt will continue to be a concern as we head into summer. And the drought monitor doesn't fully reflect that because it's kind of pointing towards local conditions versus broader conditions. So, if you're in the lower elevations, they're not fully taking into account that low snowmelt that they're expecting to see later this summer. But, once again, still some room for positivity, but cautious optimism, I would say. So just finishing up here, here's some key takeaways, key messages from this. April was still above average, but definitely cooler than March, which is kind of unusual to see. Eastern Colorado has been very dry. They have seen some recent precipitation in some locations, but still saw some significant flash drought develop in April. Recent precipitation has helped drought conditions in some areas, and I think we can expect to see that continue this week with the recent precipitation that we saw. But once again, our water limitations from our very low snowpack season will continue to be a concern as we head into summer. And we still have a long way to go to chip away at those major drought deficits. Over the next few weeks, definitely expecting above normal temperatures as we head into June. And then, all but certain to see El Nino develop this summer. Tends to bring wetter than normal conditions to Colorado. If we get that coupled with an active monsoon, could see some beneficial precipitation in our area. But again, it's not a perfect relationship, so take that with a grain of salt still. And that's all I have. Feel free to email me if you have any questions, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Allie. Any questions for Allie? All right. Well, hearing none, if a question pops up, just feel free to put it in the chat. And thank you again, Ali, for your presentation. I guess there's a little bit of good news, which is always good to hear. And I think we can pass it over to Brian from NRCS.
Yeah, thank you, Emily and Allie. Let me share my screen here. All right. Looks like you are seeing my the main slide presentation,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Go ahead and get into it here. There we go. All right. Hopping into kind of where where snowpack is currently at. Although the season has, for the most part, passed at this point, we are still kind of hanging on by maybe a few threads. I'd call it a little bit more than a thread. Fortunately, there's still a little bit of snow around and it continues to hang around, which is great. Any little bit of snow and cold content that we can hang on to at this point is good. It's going to help out. Is it going to make a big difference? No, not really. Um, but it's good to see these late season storms come through and be quite cold, at least for the mountains and keep the snowpack around a little bit because it'll dampen the fire weather conditions at least for the time being and preserve the runoff, and we won't see the evaporative demand be so high in the mountains, so it allows it to hang on for a little bit. And I'll get into that here a bit more towards the end of the presentation. All right. So I always have to prepare this presentation at least the day before, if not a few days before, depending on workload and whatnot. And here today, and with the storm cycle that we're currently in, as I look out my window here, there's some information to add on. I did my best to add on a few slides here to put the recent precipitation totals that we received just yesterday into this presentation. Uh, so, so hopefully I capture that well. Yeah, I don't have too many slides on it actually. So as of yesterday morning, snowpack was 12% of median. And then this morning, it's 16% of median. Really, a 4% difference again, as I mentioned, is really nothing much to write home about. But it's a bit of an improvement that we'll certainly take after the winter that we had. I didn't have a slide on this, so I'll just mention it. The improvements from yesterday today in snowpack was a 6% improvement in the combined Yampa White, and again, a 6% improvement in the South Platte, 4% in the North Platte, and then 3% each in the Gunnison and Colorado headwaters. The values that you're seeing here, this graphic is as of yesterday morning. So for those values that I just mentioned, you'll want to bump each of them up here in this graphic. So a little bit of an improvement, no improvement in the southern basins, in at least in the ways of snowpack. Zooming out, as I have done a lot this winter, looking at the entire nation again, we seem to be right for the most part in line with normal for the rest of the country. At least the central, southern, and I would argue the north central mountains across the western US. Snowpack is really just not that great, well below normal, well below 50%, with the exception of what's up in the northern portion of the country, and even that is well below normal for this point in the year. And as I've mentioned before, and as my counterparts are finding, much of the snowpack that we're seeing in the northern US is actually only at the highest elevations. The snowpack at the lower elevations is almost entirely gone from the significantly warm temperatures they had up there as well. But what is there is mainly at the upper elevations and allowing them to hold on to some of that snowpack a little bit longer than we are. Um, we are experimenting with a new product here at NRCS, and mainly what I'm alluding to is the University of Arizona Swan Distributed SWE product. So if you see the purple kind of colors. There's a little bit of blue. This is the legend here. In the background of the maps that you typically know from us, this is the distributed SWE model that we're now working with. This is not currently available to the public. It's only available to NRCS at this point. But hopefully in the next month or two, IT will have the ability to send a update to the production servers and allow the public to access this tool as well. The main reason I'm putting this out there is because I want to show the difference in snowpack coverage between what we're seeing as of 2 days ago in the mountains of Colorado and the snowpack that we would see on a typical year for May 17th. So you could see again, focusing on the kind of purple pink hues in the background, that's the snowpack as of 2 days ago. And now this is the snowpack coverage from 2017, which is one of the years that was most closest to normal for this time of year. And then I'll also point out that in this particular graphic, all of the SNOTEL sites, all of the dots are accurate values for May 17th of 2017 here. You can see that the snowpack in the northern portion of the state was a bit lower compared to normal, whereas the southern half of the state was normal to above normal. And then going back again to this year, May 17th of this year, these values are not updated just because it is a development tool. But nonetheless, focusing on the snowpack coverage, you can see the vast difference between this year's snowpack and a normal snowpack again in the pink there. Much different this year compared to normal. All right, the next few graphics are pointing out the records that we're seeing in terms of snowpack peak for this particular graphic, and then in the future two slides, the early snowmelt that we are seeing at all of our SNOTEL sites. Now, in a way, I would say that this year and this particular map almost normalizes the record low snowpack peaks that we're seeing, because you're seeing a lot of reds and a lot of oranges all over the map. Unfortunately, that's the year that we had. Snowpack was very low at all sites. So don't let the red and oranges all over the map make you think this is normal. This is well out of normal. So we're talking about the snowpack peak that we saw at each of our SNOTEL sites this year, either indicated here kind of by the green X or the top of the snowpack peak here for each of the individual sites. And for sites with 20-year period of record or more, 53 of our sites were at record low snowpack this year, whenever it happened to be for each of these sites, and 19 were the second lowest on the record, lowest on the record, and that's for 118 sites in Colorado. So that's a bit more than half were record low snowpack peaks this year, and that snowpack peak is what we really key off of to be our water supply driver for all of our river basins. Okay, now looking at the snowpack peak date and when it occurred, this was record low snowpack peak on the early side, okay? So the arrow indicates that it was earlier. Again, a considerable number of reds and oranges, the earliest snowpack peak or the second earliest on record. And I'm also gonna draw attention to the 3 blue dots here. These sites are relatively low elevation, and the fact that we're seeing the snowpack peak being the latest that we've seen it actually is a testament to how dry the year was. These sites, Copeland Lake, Apishpa, and I'm forgetting the name of the site there out of Laramie. They actually saw their peak a bit later than normal because their snowpack was so low throughout the entirety of the year. So we're only talking about an inch or two of snowpack peak when there are typically, 5 or 6 inches of snowpack peak SWE. So that's why you're seeing those blues. Those are actual true values. And they just happen to be so late only because of the very dry conditions that we saw this year. Okay, and finally, the record earliest meltout So the meltout is when snowpack hits zero for the first time in a year. And you can see that there were 60 sites that had the earliest snowpack meltout that has ever been seen in their period of record for sites with 20 years or more. So considerable. And all of that leads to, of course, poor runoff conditions and poor meltout. So as I mentioned earlier, I didn't update this particular graphic as of this morning, so we're still at that 12% of median snowpack as of yesterday. As of this morning, we're 16% of median. It was just a slight tick up here. So if we were actually looking at today's graph, it was about 3/10 of an inch, actually 2/10 of an inch. So it's really nothing to write home about. But it is of note that the snowpack peak that we saw being the lowest in the early melt that we saw, we have seen help with these cooler temps that started on about April 1 and have really allowed the snowpack to persist, as opposed to the snowpack continuing this relatively steep melt for this time of year. It's not abnormal to see those melt rates 2 months later, but to see them this early is extremely, extremely rare. Of course, so rare that it's record. And to see it continue on would have been a real detriment. So fortunately, we have seen a return to cooler temperatures and some near normal precipitation, but not quite normal. I'll get into that here in a little bit. I wanted to use this graphic one last time this year to include 1981, and the previous graphic that I showed, 1981, was not available in that tool, and I use this tool for many of you who have been through these presentations in the past few months. 81 was actually the previous dry year, the previous driest year through much of our winter, but it wasn't shown in our previous graphics, so I use this tool to show that until we hit middle of March when things started to melt out, and that's when actually 1981 typically, or 1981 really saw their increase in snowpack. So just to point this out again, we are no longer record low snowpack, but we're very close to it as of this morning, but we are still below 1981. Again, that saw that bump later in April, or excuse me, earlier in April, I should say, and then saw a little bit of a return to colder weather and wetter weather through June. But this year we have seen a return to cooler weather, and fortunately it's allowed our snowpack to persist a little bit. We're still flirting with record low. And then just going back to this, showing that sharp decline in the snow course data as well as the SNOTEL data, they were validating one another. As of April 1, all other previous years continue to see increases in snowpack, with the exception of 2026. From March to April, we saw a significant decline, one of the few years to do that. And that was in, and the significance of this is the fact that the snow course data goes back nearly 90 years, and that's what we were comparing to, was 90 years in the period of record, which is greater than the SNOTEL period of record. All right. The storm that we've seen over the last few days has been beneficial, but as Ali mentioned, it has not been overly significant. It has been helpful, and where has it been the most helpful? It's been the most helpful in those northern basins because, kind of like I mentioned before, in the South Platte and the combined Yampa White, a little bit in the North Platte, and then less so the further south we go. The Gunnison and the Colorado headwaters did see some improvements. And that last graphic was just the total storm, or the total increase in precipitation over the last 4 days. This is the change in percent, or excuse me, this is the percent of normal precipitation received in the mountains over the last 4 days. Again, just kind of highlighting the improvement in the northern half of the state. We have seen above normal for this time of year precipitation, but don't let these colors fool you. This is well within the realm of normal. It's just made a little bit more extreme because of the short period of time, just those 4 days. Forgive me there. And then dry, no precipitation, nearly no precipitation in the southern half. Again, not out of the normal over a 4-day period, did not see any precipitation. So don't be too alarmed by these numbers, but just showing the change and where it was located. All right, now looking at precipitation for the greater water year, SNOTEL precipitation in all of the major basins starting on October 1st through May 17th. This is the year-to-date total. 73 in the South Platte Basin, 77 in the combined Yampa White, 72 in the Colorado headwaters. And I'll again draw out, as I have much of the year, that a fair amount of the values that we're seeing in the San Juans are augmented, I would argue, slightly augmented by the storms that we received in October. But these are still the values that we're seeing for year-to-date precipitation for across the state. So I'll normalize that here in a little bit. And then looking at the subbasins, this is the precipitation that we had seen through the Water Climate Monitoring Committee meeting last month. And then I just wanted to compare or show you the change to what we see now this month. I don't know if you actually saw the change that I made there, but it was quite unnoticeable. Which goes to show that we've received pretty much near normal precipitation since last WCMC meeting. So I'll go back one more time. You can see a little bit of a change in the Colorado headwaters, the Blue River, and that area. Actually, sorry, no, the Blue River didn't change. At least in color, it didn't change very much. So very little change. Just goes to show that 77% of median is where precipitation year to date is as of yesterday morning. And last month we were at 75% of median, so essentially very little change. I received a question from a reporter a few weeks ago asking what the deficit in precipitation year to date is. So I provided that for a number of basins in the next few slides, and we'll focus on that here in a little bit. You'll see here, this is looking at the San Miguel, Dolores, Animas, San Juan basins. And again, I always like to point out that in the San Juans, we saw that significant rain event. I think this was about 6 inches of rain over the course of about 7 days. And, you know, if you took the black line, which is this year, and shifted it down and 4 or so inches to just kind of take out some of the effects of this rather flashy storm at this point in the year, so early in the year, it really doesn't have that much impact on our overall water supply situation at this point in the year. So that's why I like to kind of shift it down in my mind, remove 2 inches out of this storm. And that would mean that this deficit would then be 7.1 inches of water as opposed to the 3.1 that we're seeing right now. We would be looking at a more significant deficit. And I think our snowpack largely shows that. Moving up into the Colorado headwaters, where there was nowhere near as much of an impact from that October storm, the deficit is now 6.4 inches of water. I actually think they got about 7. No, I think they got less than that. I think they got about 0.4 of an inch of water yesterday. So we're looking at a deficit of about 6 inches of water for year-to-date precipitation in the mountains of the Colorado headwaters. The South Platte is at a deficit of 6.1 inches as of yesterday morning and is 72% of median. And then kind of finally addressing that question to you that the media reporter asked me a few weeks ago, how much would it take to get back to normal? What is our deficit? And for example, looking at the Yampa White Little Snake, we would need, with a 6.4 inch deficit, actually, I think it's less than that now since we got this morning's or yesterday's precipitation. I think it's about 5.7 inch deficit now. We would need nonetheless about 190% of median precipitation to get back to normal by the end of the water year on September 30th. So just to kind of help put things in perspective a little bit. Is it possible? At least in the Yampa White Little Snake, yes, it is. We did see one year, which was 1997, where we did wind up receiving enough precipitation from this point in the year through the end of the water year in 97 to actually get back to normal. I did go through and look at a number of the other basins, the analogs, and we did not quite show the amount of precipitation that would be needed to get back to normal. Very long-winded way of saying it's not very likely for us to get back to normal. However, The outlooks that Ali was showing are optimistic and do seem to show a chance, but cautious optimism, the way she put it. I like that. Moving into looking at the entire state of Colorado, we're looking at about a 5.4 or just about 5-inch total deficit, maybe a little bit more if you do want to kind of negate a little bit the effects of that October precipitation, depending on how you want to look at it. And here I did the projections looking forward. It doesn't seem that even in the best case scenario, we could get back to normal by the end of the water year. Not to say that it's entirely impossible, but it doesn't look very likely. Okay, so removing the October storms from the entire state of Colorado, so basically just looking at the precipitation from November 1st through May 17th, this would then be the water year-to-date precipitation. And you can see how much of the state is below normal, even for precipitation in the mountains. And just looking back over the last month since the last presentation on April 21st, you can see largely across the state near normal precipitation, a little bit better in the northern half and some of the southern basins, a bit drier in the central portion of the state. But as I mentioned, statewide precipitation is 75% of normal. Or excuse me, this was over the last, precipitation since the last meeting was 75% of normal. Forgive me, it wasn't near normal. It was a little bit below normal. And then month-to-date precipitation better in the northern half. That too was 75% of normal. So since May 1, precipitation was been 75% of normal. And in another way of viewing that deficit of 5.4 inches. So we should be somewhere around here at this point in the year, but we're looking at that kind of deficit for the entire state of Colorado. Okay, soil moisture. I'm not going to dwell on this too long because of, one, the short period of record, two, the minimal number of sensors that we have, and it being a low year. The interplay between those statistics are a bit on the interesting side. It is typically at this time of year where snowpack is starting to melt and get into those soils, and that's why we're seeing these below normal soil moisture conditions, which these values are, at our understanding, true, but are you got to take them with a grain of salt because of the relatively short period of record and the interesting year that we're having right now. So soil moisture is still looking pretty dry. So the previous slide was for the 8-inch sensor. The 20-inch sensor here on this slide is a bit more of an indicator of a longer-term drought, but still indicating normal to below normal across much of the state. Reservoirs are at 85% of median based on this should be May 1 data. Forgive me, I didn't update that. And that's down 4% from 89% of median last month. All right, moving into stream flows. This is our snow to flow tools. So basically what it shows is snowpack with the solid black line for this year, and then stream flows for the particular stream gauge in the black dotted line if the values are updated. And you can see that snowpack here in at least above Lake Granby melted to about the half melt and then really started to persist. We did see a peak earlier on in the year back in April, about the beginning of April, and we've seen things kind of tail off. And this is inflow into Lake Granby, by the way. There is the possibility that we could see a bit of a bump with the more recent melt that we've seen, but that data has not updated. And I'll get into that recent bump here in this slide and a few others. So this is the Animas at Durango going all the way down to the southwest corner of the state. While we did get past our half melt, we did pick up a little bit more snow, and that melt over the last few weeks that we've seen, I think, has helped propel stream flow to reach a new peak. I think also part of that is some of the precipitation that we've received over the last few weeks, but we have seen a new peak, at least on the Animas at Durango. It could also be calls for water as well. The San Juan also seen a new peak, at least at Caracas. Um, and snowpack is just about melted out there. Yampa River near Maybell, also seeing a new streamflow peak compared to what we saw back in early April. This is one where we did not reach our half melt for the snowpack there. I would anticipate seeing this hydrograph continuing to increase, particularly if they continue to get precipitation like they have been. So that's a promising sign there. And then here, the Gunnison River at Gunnison, near the town of Gunnison. Again, seeing at least us flirting with new peak. I didn't actually check the values to see if it's above or not. And then the Rio Grande 30-mile bridge. Of course, a lot of this is reservoir runoff. Arkansas River at Pueblo. We have seen a new peak there. Again, probably reservoir driven. Okay, finally, into streamflow forecasts. As was the case for last month and now this month as of May 1, streamflow forecasts are well below normal. Not much of a surprise there. So kind of highlighting that in a different way, you can see that the right bound, the most upper end of the forecast, don't even get above 70%, at least for the Colorado River headwaters. They're more in the 60% range, and that's even for Willow Creek at Willow Creek Reservoir. And that's the most optimistic forecast. The most realistic forecasts are the 50% exceedance, the ones in green, bolded here, and you can see that none of those really get above 31% of median, at least for the Colorado River headwaters. This is more, this graphic or slide here is more of an enticement to encourage you to go into the individual streamflow forecast for your basin or the ones you're interested in to have a look at what the actual streamflow forecasts are. But nonetheless, of course, well below normal. And then I put this last one in here. This is the inflow into Lake Powell. The NRCS forecast is 11% of median inflow. I believe the Weather Service forecasts are even lower than that, unfortunately. So just to put things in perspective, but hopefully the rain that we're seeing will help out. I'm going to put these last two slides in here just simply to show how things have changed, at least in the automated models for Dillon inflow and Blue Mesa inflow. There is some indication that we have seen a little bit of an improvement there. It's hard to tell when we're this far out on the extremes, but there are some potential positive changes there. I would not rest my hat on these, and I'll get into that here in 1 second, but at least the automated models are showing a chance of better runoff based on the last 2 weeks of precipitation. And then finally looking at the Yampa near Maybell and the Dolores near Dolores, the automated models have been off from the official models a little bit here, but it looks like little change expected probably as of June 1, depending on what happens within the rest of the month. But just trying to give an indication of what's changed over the last 2 weeks since the last official forecasts. All right, in summary, snowpack across Colorado is 12% of median as of yesterday and 16% of median based on the improvements that we saw from precip over the last day. But that is down from last month. This is the second lowest snowpack in the period of record at this point in time, but really we really need to hone off of the snowpack peaks that we saw earlier in the year, and those are record low, which are pointing at record low runoff. Statewide precipitation is below normal at 77% of median, and that's a very little change from last month. Recent precipitation has been most beneficial in the northern mountains, a little bit in the Sangre de Cristos and the eastern San Juans. And then yesterday's improvements were mainly focused on the northern mountains. April's not typically a big precip month, so when we do get when we do get some precipitation in April, it can help out a bit. But in essence, it's really kind of a drop in the bucket, as I showed in the deficit. And the deficits for precipitation, we need a lot more to really get back to normal, about 190% by the end of the year, and that's a big, tall ask. So cautious optimism. And then finally, reservoir storage is at 85% of median, a little bit down a little bit from last month. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. And stream flow forecasts, as I mentioned before, are running relatively low. So a little bit of bright spot with the most recent precipitation that we've seen and the cool temperatures and the snowpack kind of holding on, but it's really not going to make much of a difference in the longer term water supply. And we'll have to continue to monitor those conditions. That is all that I have.
All right. Thank you, Brian, as always. Any questions for Brian today? Well, again, as always, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I know that, Allie, thank you for fielding some questions there. We're having some good discussions in the chat today. But thanks again, Ryan, for your presentation. And then I think now we can hand it over to Paul from the Division of Fire Prevention and Control. Thank you for being here. And I will pass it over to you for our final presentation on wildfire today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good morning, everybody. Emily, I appreciate you putting Brian before me, so I'm not the only person that talks doom and gloom, because I was concerned after listening to Ellie talk and have some pretty positive stuff there. And so honestly, for most of my presentation, a bunch of it was touched on already. So with the weather and our current drought indicators, so I'm just going to talk mainly more specifically about fire stuff. So I'm going to skip through a bunch of the slides I have, show you a couple resources that are available for you all to look at any time when you need them, as things are happening. So my screens are being really weird right now, so hopefully everything's showing up all right. So again, not that anybody needs to have a reminder of what last year looked like, but just a quick reminder. Last year we had right around 4,000 wildfires in Colorado, for about nearly 271,000 acres. So that's fairly normal for Colorado. So it's something to keep in mind as we go through some of these things. I'm going to jump through the stats because that was last year and that's not as important as this year. So just to kind of tie back into some of the conversations that were had earlier, especially with Ellie talking about some things. I think one thing that's really important to recognize is, if you look at this May document over here, this is kind of the seasonal outlook, and this is for the month of May. It was extremely, it predicted under very much for this month already. So in the southeast part of the state, we have had a lot of fires up to this point, a lot of large fires. And if you, in the last 7 days, within kind of the Oklahoma Panhandle, southeast Colorado, a little bit of New Mexico, and a little bit into Kansas, just with 22 fires in the last 7 days, we've had over 220,000 acres burned in the last 7 days. And so when you look at those drought indicators in that southeast part of this state, and the little bit of precipitation we've had there, it is extremely dry, and we've had very active fires happening in that area. This moisture that has come in has been beneficial in a lot of places, but it hasn't been beneficial there. We are still actively taking care of stuff out in that area. So what we see happening moving forward, if you look into June, as we go into that top right picture there, it's very seasonal, where we're going to start trending a little bit more to the western slope. So we will start seeing higher fire activities on that western slope. And that is what we're concerned with over on that side is, and it was noted earlier, is we've have had some freezing taking place, and that freezing took place in some of the vegetation that already budded out. And so vegetation that was in green up and slows down some fire spread is now dormant and dead. And so we anticipate having issues with some of those. As you move into July, things will continue to be normal for the fire season. And again, normal is right around 4,000 fires within the state of Colorado, and Western Slope will still be active. I truly anticipate the eastern side of Colorado to stay in fire season. Normally, we have a little green up that will help us with the limited moisture. We're seeing very limited moist or green up, and the thatch layer still being able to overtake any of the green that has been in that area. Things that are important to note in June and July and also in May is we have fire all over the United States, the potential for fire. And so what that does for us is it increases the competition for resources. And so there's only so many resources available. We have our Colorado resources, obviously, for Division of Fire Prevention and Control, but that's not enough for everything within the state. So when we have multiple fires going in different parts of the country, there is a large demand for aircraft, hand crews, and all of those things. And so that leads to limited resource availability when it comes to that. So we are expecting a above average fire season as we move forward. So I'm just going to share a couple other really things that I think are important or places for folks to be able to see some things. Um, Emily, does that showing the dashboard now that I switched over?
Yes.
Awesome. So I will put this link in the chat for folks, but this is a place where if you're interested, you can go in and see what's currently happening as far as fires go. So kind of talks about initial attacks that are happening right at the moment, initial attacks that happened in the day prior, but you can kind of zoom in to see what's going on here. So here's an indicator of some of the fires that we've had, such as a sharp fire. You could get into there. It gives you some information about that fire, how large it is. This is how large it is on the Colorado side, not the entire fire, but it gives you some really good data there. The other thing that's really helpful is if you click on the top here, gets you over to the fire environment update, which is really important. And it's kind of a one-stop shop where you can look at fire weather maps. This is a hot, dry, windy index. We use this a lot. This is a really good indicator for if it's going to be hot, dry, windy. It gives us an idea of days that are upcoming and how bad they're going to be. So it gives you a good idea there. So we can see that we have a few days of, kind of very low fire danger because of some cloud cover, some RH recovery, and all those kinds of things. So that's super helpful. Um, Energy release component, which is another indicator that we use on a regular basis. It just kind of tells us how much energy is available within the fuels based on fuel moisture and all those types of things and how they're trending. So we can look at different stations and get some information out there. Then it also goes into the drought index, all those different things. It's just a really nice one-stop shop to be able to get information and not have to go to 5 or 6 different websites to get that. Additionally, um, our intelligence shop puts together a weekly weather briefing, kind of a weather environment summary. Um, it kind of breaks down all the information from all of our partners. It's not just our information, it's information that we pull together so that folks, for firefighters who are out there or decision makers, to be able to pull up, get the information in one place, looks at weather warnings, the hot, dry, windy index, all those important things to us. Another indicator is vapor pressure index, kind of talks about how much moisture and RH the fuels are really pulling in. The drought index also again, and then it kind of gives some step by step, severity days and what we're looking at there. And so just a really handy thing. It's published every Monday, gives the outlook for the next couple days. If it's a really bad stretch of fire weather, they'll do it multiple times in a week, but at a minimum, we're getting it done once a week. And it is available for anybody to look at on this dashboard. A couple things that I think are really important to recognize with fire danger and our concerns this year moving forward. It was touched on the soil moistures. We are concerned that some of our larger fuels, which are still pretty dry, are going to carry lots of fire, but with that low soil moisture, we have a really high probability to have some more severe fires. Severe in the sense that they're damaging soils and and plants and those types of things further into the ground. And so we could see more long-term effects on some of those. And so the soil moisture is important in the grand scheme of things when it comes to that. The monsoon push, obviously, we're hopeful for that. The thing that normally comes with monsoon is lightning also. And so we're paying attention to that, especially the few days prior to any monsoon pushes are very heavy with lightning. So we have to pay attention to that as we move forward. And we recognize that fire conditions change rapidly. So the places that are getting moisture today, within Colorado with hot, dry, windy, we're usually, 7 to 10 days out of them being available to burn. So we truly anticipate it being an above average year where we are mildly optimistic that we'll get some moisture and it's not terrible, but we're prepared for whatever comes for it, either the floods or the fires. I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, I'll stick this link in there so everybody can look at it whenever they need to.
Thank you so much, Paul. This is a super, super helpful resource. Any questions for Paul? I do have one question actually. In the monthly outlooks for above or below average wildfire chances, do you know what data is used for those maps? Yep, these maps.
So there is a whole bunch of different things that are utilized. They're definitely falling back on historic data when it comes to climate trends and those types of things during those time frames. But they're also looking at weather predictions, current fuel models, and then working that out based on what's predicted moving forward. So there's probably 10 or 15 different attributes within those models moving out through there.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks, Paul. This was super helpful again. And thank you for taking the time to come and speak to us this morning.
And as soon as I can figure out where to stop sharing, I promise I will.
Mm, there we go. Awesome. Cool. Well, for the rest of our meeting, I think I'll turn it over to you all for local conditions update. Would love to hear how things are looking in your kind of corner of the state. So I will open it up to the floor.
Hey Emily, this is Melissa
Hey.
Owens with Aurora Water. I just have a very, very brief update. Our total storage as of last week was at 56%. Spinny Mountain Reservoir, which is our main mountain reservoir, was at 53%, and Aurora Reservoir is at 93%. But we're anticipating, excuse me, that being drawn down over the summer. We're still in stage 1 drought restrictions, so we're watering twice a week. And I was hoping to have some consumptive use data, but I don't have that. So that's my quick update for today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Melissa.
Hi, Emily. This is Ryan Shepler. I can give the Denver water update. We're also on stage 1 drought, 2-day-a-week watering. So same for us, expecting to be there all season. Our storage is at 79% full, holding steady, but we're not expecting any increases. Usually we're at 87% full and increasing this time of the year. We've seen a slight uptick from the most recent precipitation, but less than we would just be seeing from a normal, more productive snow melt this time of the year.
Gotcha. Thank you, Ryan. Hey, John, I think you're muted.
Sorry.
No worries.
So Thornton Storage, as of last week, we're at 81.1% of capacity. Our storage is in good shape. But of course, Clear Creek and the South Platte aren't. And so we may have peaked storage, who knows? We had some good news about consumption over the last week is 10.1% below last year. So we're trying to save 10% over last year by imposing stage 1, 2 days a week restrictions. So that number came up once. Let's hopefully it'll increase and go on throughout the summer, and then we'll have a good snow year now that the weather pattern has set in permanently. So
Hey,
that's
John.
Thornton. Yes.
John, Drew Beckwith
Yes.
from Westminster. That minus 10% was for the month, for year to date, but like what were you measuring that minus 10
Oh,
over?
I'm sorry. Yeah, month to date, 10% below last year.
So for the month of April?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
No, the month of May.
May, similar in Westminster, but we were still up in January, February, and March, and so we also have had a pretty low May, but it hasn't erased the ups from earlier in the year.
Yeah, year to date, we're down for almost 5% below
cool.
last year. Year
Below
to date.
last year.
Yeah,
That's good.
things are going well except for the stream flow.
Thanks, John.
You
That's
bet.
helpful. And thanks, Drew, for adding some additional context there. Anyone else?
Does anyone on the call, sorry, Drew again from Westminster, does anyone on the call want to guess if we've seen peak flow in our Front Range rivers yet or not? It's just been very bizarre to watch the river gauges, like at Clear Creek at Golden, for instance, and they they're not really peaking. They kind of went up a little bit. Anyone want to guess? Is it past or not?
But we're thinking we may have seen peak inflow at our reservoirs at least. So I don't know if that's the exact same thing, Drew, but it's like 50-50, I guess. We can't tell, but we may have seen peak inflow at several locations, at like Dillon and other reservoirs. So
Okay.
I don't know. I don't think that answers your question very well, but
Well,
we're thinking we may have seen it.
yeah. It gives me comfort that other people are like, I have no idea.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
potentially.
I'd say it's largely dependent on future weather. Um, just based on snowmelt alone, it's probably already happened, at least from what we saw, even at the higher elevations when we were measuring snowpack. It had seemed like snow melt had already kind of peaked. It was going to be more of a long, drawn out hydrograph peak,
Hmm.
at least when I say long drawn out, I don't mean through July. I just meant through kind of May, maybe June, if that. But there just wasn't a lot to drive that hydrograph. So I think it's going to be largely based on future precipitation, which is relatively characteristic of much of the Front Range.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yes,
really hard to tell is the short
we
way of
may
saying it.
see the peaks in the rivers because of this rainstorm, not because of snowmelt.
Exactly. And when it happens, so if we have a bit more of like a warm up and then we get rain right after it, which is kind of the way the weather typically runs,
Yeah.
that might drive a peak. So if you're trying to capture it in your reservoirs or whatnot, I don't think let's put it this way. I don't think it's going to be a very predictable peak.
Okay.
I think, Drew, a better question might be more realistic. Not whether or not we've seen peak, but we could have a pool or opinions on will the call in the South Platte Basin break the 1900 barrier? Since we're really for the spring so far, we've been in the 1800s. Today has been an improvement after the wet weather of Sunday evening, Monday, with the call at the state line into Nebraska being 1897. That's the most junior we've seen on the South Platte since really diversions began this year. Up closer to the divide, up in the high country, the call in South Park, right above Tarryall Reservoir, is 1780, or I'm sorry, 1876.
Word.
And that kind of gives you a perspective of there's not a whole lot of flow up in the high country. The streams up there are about a third of what is median, and that is in the middle of May when we should be seeing flows really on the hydrograph rising strongly at this point. So it's a dire situation.
Appreciate this conversation. And I hate to leave it off on a dire situation. So,
You're welcome, Emily.
thanks, Within. But I just want to thank all the presenters today, Allie, Brian, and Paul. Jenna, thank you for putting the link to Paul's wildfire dashboard in the chat. So if you want to access that, please take a look at the chat. Our next WCMC meeting is on June 16th. So thank you all for coming, and I will see you in a month. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.